Thank you. Well, as Dennis said, the presentation I'm going to talk about today, or really the discussion, is talking about active learning, what's happening in the classroom, and even in between spaces. And at the end of Kevin's presentation, he talked and showed some of those incredible classrooms that were very engaged and interactive, and blackboards that you needed binoculars to read. We still see a lot of that out there, but we certainly see a move and a desire for the schools to go to more active learning. For those who are here this morning, it's a little bit repetitive, but part of that is what we're trying to do is get the students engaged. So it goes along a lot with what Kevin said there, that if they're engaged, they're more likely to return, they're more likely to stay in school, to be more successful in school, and so forth. So certainly that's a big part of Steelcase's role, is saying what can we do in active learning. As Dennis said, I've been with Steelcase for 34 years now. It's hard for me to believe that, longer than all of my students that I work with and call on have been alive. I know that twice as much as some of them have told me now that too. I know that also. But I've been working with the education group for about the last 10 years and focus both higher ed and also K through 12. The presentation, the focus here is really more towards higher ed, but it's certainly the same conversation that we have with the K through 12 organizations also. In fact, not to alarm some of the higher ed schools that are here, but in some cases, my most advanced classrooms and schools that are implementing active learning are the K through 12 side. And so be prepared for them when they come to class to be expecting that active learning versus when they come into a space and it's sit and get. And as I talked about this morning to some of the faculty that was here, one of the things I'd ask you to think about is when you walk in the classrooms, whatever the space is, whether you're a student or a faculty, think about what's expected of you just based upon the physical space. That doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but there's certainly an impression when you walk into some of the spaces, because it might be more of a sit and get like this, or it might be very much a collaborative. And we'll see that as we go through some of the slides. So the first thing you might look at is Steelcase. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Steelcase, but Steelcase is headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. About a $3 billion sales in terms of company. We saw a lot of, certainly our biggest market is the commercial market, so certainly in the corporate world we're known pretty well. In the education world, people might know us, might not know us, but really kind of our goal is to help schools and colleges create the most effective, rewarding, and inspiring spaces, and some of which you'll see down when you go down the second floor, examples of things like that. And so we're really trying to prepare the next generation for what those learning environments look like. And certainly, and Kevin talked a lot about, a little bit there about the different generations, and the generation that's coming at us is not wired the same way we're wired. Their expectations are different than what we're expecting, and certainly our environments need to change with that. Just a little bit about active learning, because people throw that word out and they're like, what does that mean? This is really kind of the definition of what we talk about in terms of active learning. I'm going to read this a little bit, but it's certainly about pursuit of knowledge, engaging in a combination of multiple experiences. It's also individual study. Sometimes people forget about the individual side of it. They think of active learning as just we're going to do collaborative groups and it's teamwork and group work all the time. That's a part of it. There still is individual study, and we don't want to forget that. And there are some people that's the way they learn best too. So it's not a full pendulum over just a collaboration. Active learning can be also in an individual sense also. There's certainly a lot of dyadic work or two-person work. So you see a lot of classrooms that have tables where two people can sit, share ideas with each other, and collaborate that way. And then there's certainly the long-term projects where you've got larger groups in play. And I'd say what the difference, when I think back when I was in school a long, long time ago, we did a lot of that group work and collaborative work, but it wasn't in classrooms. That's kind of what the difference is. We generally did that outside of class because the physical space didn't support that. And what's interesting is you think about it, at least in my groups, when we got together outside of class, not everybody was an equal participant in class. Maybe not even me sometimes. But, one of the things when you start flipping that and you start doing that work in class, it really kind of forces and requires people to participate in class because the teachers, frankly, let's be honest, they're observing you. They're grading you on some of that stuff. And to be real honest, when we did some of the work outside of class, all the time when we said we were going to meet, we had conflict. Something happened. So we generally would say, Amy, you do this part, Brian, you do this part. Eileen, you do this part. I'll pull it out, send it to me, or you couldn't send it back when I was doing email. Give it to me, and I'll reformat, retype it, and we'll put it all the same way. So we really even weren't doing the group collaboration like we're certainly asking people to do now. And again, as we talked this morning, the reason why we're doing all of this, it is about engagement. And we do think there's a link between engagement and student success and student retention. And that's really what's driving all this activity. Probably the biggest frustration we had, and it came through when we were talking to some of the faculty this morning, is active learning requires more square feet per person. That's very difficult today on college campuses where in order to make the class work or to make the funding work or whatever, we have to have 185 people in this classroom. I have a lot of schools I work with that put in some of our new furniture and new applications, but they put in the same number of students in that same classroom, and they're not getting the same results. And part of that is active learning requires movement. I have to be able to reconfigure the furniture. The students have to be able to move around. If I'm an instructor, I don't want to be trapped up in the front of the room like this. I want the ability to walk through and see what's happening at the back table over there and see what's happening at that table over there. I wish I had a magic bullet and a silver bullet that would tell you how to get around that. I don't. You need to work with the presidents to frankly change the way we're managing space. If we're truthful, most of our spaces when we manage in a classroom, it's based upon efficiency. It really has nothing to do with I won't say nothing, but it has little to do with how we're educating students and student success. And what's interesting is I dived down, I did with some of the schools. We always have to make sure that initial classroom fits 40 students because that's how many students sign up. When we get to about the second week, and I think part of it's because of engagement, we're down to 34 students because 6 people dropped out. And we have certainly, and Eileen will talk about measurements after this presentation, we've certainly seen where we have active classrooms, the dropout rate has reduced, and kids become more engaged in that space. And so that's important. We talked, and Kevin mentioned a little bit in this, about engaging all the senses to support cognitive mapping. These kids are wired differently. Their expectation is it's a fun environment. It's a cool environment. You talk about the 5-minute videos and the YouTubes. And my wife and daughter are both school teachers, and it drives them nuts because that's what the kids do all day. They watch some of the YouTube videos on their Chromebooks and stuff. But you have to understand that that's kind of the attention span sometimes. You got to make sure you're using all their senses. And to sit here in a lecture and listen to 50 minutes up here and just watch a single slide presentation is very difficult. Especially in the adolescents, when I talk to the younger kids, I had an individual talk to me that said the kid's sense of time is 7 times different than yours. Meaning if you're sitting for 5 minutes, that's asking a kid to sit for 35 minutes. Remember that when your grandchildren are over or your younger children are over. It's a 7 times difference. So to ask them to sit for a 50-minute period is sitting for significantly longer. Now, college, they've sort of figured that stuff out, but it's a long time to sit and to pay attention to it. We talked a little bit about this also. Given the idea that change of posture supports brain movement. So make sure the chair moves. Make sure it flexes. You're going to see in some of the drawings that show one of the biggest things that we get back from students about active learning is the idea of a swivel chair. The ability that if I'm sitting here and somebody asks a question in the back, I can swivel around and I can take a look at you. As I walk around the classroom, if we weren't videotaping, if I walked around the classroom, if you're a visual learner, you could follow me as I walk around. When you're in a chair that doesn't swivel and doesn't move, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to squirm, you're going to move around a little bit, but you're going to not be comfortable after a while. And so it's really important that you allow that movement. Some people like to stand, and so accommodate them. Accommodate spaces where they can stand and not feel like that they're, causing disruption for the rest of the class. And so we're seeing a variety of postures. We're even seeing lounge furniture now being brought into some of the classrooms. Over at one of the schools we did over in Missouri, it was interesting. One of the classrooms had lounge furniture in the front. You know why we had lounge furniture in the front? We're trying to see who would sit up in the front. You know what? They still went in the back. But we thought we were being clever, and we put lounge furniture up in front so they would sit there. We had kind of the next tier seating, which was normal desktop seating that you'd see here, and then the back rows had more stool height. We still had everybody, kind of like you guys, everybody goes to the back of the table, and that was still, but they at least had an option. And we did encourage them And the faculty started out encouraging them to try different seats, try different things. And there was a little bit of movement as we went through. The other one is, remember the physical envelope, everything is all part of that ecosystem. So ALS is active learning ecosystems. So much of the time we're developing classrooms, we're worried about what's going on up here in the front. A lot of the classrooms that I'm designing, there is no front. So we want to make sure we're using the walls over there. Even the windows, that's a great whiteboard. You know, glass is a great whiteboard. So for those who have glass in classrooms, you already have whiteboards. You're just probably afraid to write on it. Don't worry, you can write on it. Not with a Sharpie, use a regular dry eraser. But it's a great conductor and great communication. As I talked earlier, you know, how many of you, and this is the interactive part a little bit, first of all, where are most of the tools in a general classroom that you're going to use? Okay, who owns this? Me. How many of you are comfortable coming through this barrier right here? I mean, there are some people that are comfortable walking up to the front and doing that. I guess the bigger question, how many of you are not comfortable coming up to the front of the room? Maybe just me? Okay. Yeah, so you're going to see in some of these spaces when we get into true active learning, it's dispersing these tools so they're not just mine. They're also your tools. So when you want to present, you can use these tools. When you want to use the whiteboard, when you want to use the chalkboard, it's all your tools. It's not just my tools within that space. Talked a little bit, and Kevin had a slide about students' expectations. You know, we did an awful lot of research at Steelcase where we asked students. And the best thing about students is they're great guinea pigs because they'll answer surveys, they'll fill out everything, they'll talk to you. Eileen knows that they'll give you information, more than you want sometimes, but they'll be happy to tell you how they feel. But, you know, when we ask them, what's most important to you in the learning environment when you come in the classroom, this is the list that they're not all inclusive, but these are the things that they're talking to us about. They expect it to be an engaging learning experience. You know, again, going back to that 5-minute video, they expect to be entertained in some cases. They expect it to be a game. There's a lot of things that they're expecting in there that I kind of laughed because when I was in school, I don't know that I had expectations. I kind of laughed. I wish, I'd ask my mom if she was around. I'd say, was I not allowed to have expectations, or why, or what was the deal back then? But I don't think we did. We were told we just go to class. Certainly, the idea that access to technology. I mean, nothing drives me nuts, and even me to that extent now. When I go to a place where I can't get on Wi-Fi. And it's password protected, or it's just a slow process to get through. And the students expect access to that technology all the time. Sometimes it's because that's the way they take notes, that's the way they do things. Sometimes it's fact checking. I mean, when a professor or a faculty member makes a statement, and you'll see kids grab their phone and go, I don't know about that. Let me check and see if that's right. And I do that in my personal life now. So imagine. When they're going into a classroom, if you're a student, and the first thing the faculty member says is put down your laptops, put down your iPads, put down your cell phones, it's eyes on me. I mean, for some of those students, it's like cutting off a limb. And it makes them very uncomfortable when they start out. So instead of doing that, how do you incorporate that? How do you have them use that to help teach the class and help teach themselves? Again, they expect a much more interactive classroom. Very active. They get bored pretty easily. I like to tell a story. My middle son, or actually my youngest son, when he was at school, I was so thankful when he got through his sophomore year and got into his junior year. You know what the difference was between freshman, sophomore, and then junior, senior year? He was at a major university. So anybody have any idea what the difference is? Size. Large classroom, small classroom. And when he was in the large classroom, frankly, his attention span wasn't there. And my guess is after 15 minutes, you might as well switch to Latin. Because he's out. And he's not paying attention. And when he got in the small classroom, in the small group work, he was much more focused. And, a real life story, you were talking about, the cost of college. I put 3 through college. He was my youngest one. And nothing used to frustrate me more, the freshman, sophomore year, when I'd call him and say, how you doing in school? He'd say, great, doing fine. I'd say, well, how do you know that? Well, I just know that in the midterms next week, and we'll take the midterm next week. Of course, tomorrow's the last day of drop. So before I could even, stop something, get my money back, or half my money back, he wasn't getting an assessment till a real assessment till next week when the drop date was passed. It was not a good feeling as a parent at home. Now, contrast that to the junior and senior when he's in smaller classrooms, smaller group, interactive groups, when I would call and I'd say, how you doing? He'd say, fine. Again, the hair would stand up on the back of my neck. And I'd say, how do you know that? And he'd say, because when we break up in groups, I know more than my other students. Or when we were taking Spanish, because that was a real problem, he'd say, Dad, I don't know as much as they know. I need to get help. I need to get a tutor. Even though maybe the midterm was still next week, he was getting real-time assessments about how he was feeling because he was in group work. He knew when you were in a group. You know when you're in a group when you look around and you're like, these guys all know more than I do. You know when that's you, and you're going to go get some help. You also know when people are asking other questions and doing things that, you know what, I know this. They're asking things about it. They should really know because I know that stuff. And so it was real important when you make it interactive, the students know where they stand within that space. The idea of social networks, both inside and out of class, again, in a lot of cases, these students have networked with each other. It's funny, they're not necessarily networked face-to-face. Sometimes it's online. And they have more of those skills. The idea that they belong to a sense of community and a group helps them feel part of it. What's interesting, too, is they expect to have a choice to where they want or where they're working at to be able to focus, to collaborate, and socialize, wherever that is. It's very difficult to do within that space. Part of what the second floor is, when you tour that later, is you'll see there are some spaces that you can focus in, either individually or in a small group. And there are places you can collaborate and socialize in other areas, too. So it's trying to find a space that allows you to do that, everything, all within a small footprint. That's what we're trying to do in a lot of those spaces. So Aristotle that says what we have to learn to do, we learn by doing. So anytime you can make the class very engaging where you're actually doing something versus me just throwing information at you, the students are more active to remember that. I won't tell the story, but I told the story this morning about changing a flat tire. If I tell you how to change a flat tire, you might remember how to do it. I guarantee you, if you have to do it, and we're doing it outside in the parking lot, even if I do it with you, you're going to know how to change a flat tire the next time. And there's a difference between doing it and talking about it. So part of it, and certainly the magic of teaching is when I'm teaching new skills, is doing those activities either at the same time or in close proximity with it. Because you're more apt to remember that versus if I'm just giving you information. And so these spaces are trying to make spaces where you can do things. What's interesting, the difficult job for most of us is for students, half of what they learn in 1 year will be outdated in 3 years. So think about that as a freshman, what they're learning. By the time they graduate, some of that information is important. That goes back to what Kevin showed there, and I'll get it in a few slides. It's about critical thinking, some of those soft skills, as we like to call it, not content. Because for most of us, content, if you don't know content, where do you go get it now? How easy is that to access? Instantaneously. So it's not about content anymore. I also like this. We're currently preparing students for jobs that don't exist using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. So if you think about that, that's why we want to teach some of these soft skills, as we call them, critical thinking skills, 21st century classroom skills, and that's these active classrooms allow you to teach some of that and allow you as the instructor to observe that happening in that place. So again, this is really the same slide that you had up there in terms of certainly as a company and as an employer hiring people. I don't want people that have memorized content. I want people that can do this. I want people that can play nice with each other. Everything we do is teamwork and group work. And you know, in my organization, and we always joke about that frankly all the easy problems are solved. We're working on a very complex problems that we need multiple minds going at it. And so that's why a lot of what we do is in groups and teams to try to solve some of these issues. But we certainly want people who've got critical thinking, problem solving, innovation, effective communication, collaboration, self-directed learning, globally aware, civically engaged, financially and economically literate. So these are the type of skills we're looking for. The active classrooms allow you to teach in those ways, so you can actually see those activities taking place. We've certainly seen a lot of change in the pedagogy. So again, when I started in school, when I was in school, it was a lot of lecturing. It was one way, kind of like what I'm doing here. It's one-way communication. You sit, you get. on the stage, we're seeing that change. It's more constructivism pedagogy. So maybe in constructivism, for those who aren't familiar with pedagogy, constructivism pedagogy, the simple way I think about it, it's like a building block. I give you information that you're going to then build on top of it. You're going to, with your group or your team, you're going to take your information and knowledge based on your background, add to that and build on top of it. So kind of put a little cement layer on there or mortar on there. I'm going to come back and give you another building block on top of it, and then we're going to continue on from there. So it's cumulative in terms of how we learn. It's much more about the instructor as the guide on the side and not the all-knowing sage. I love when I walk by college campuses and I look in the room and I can't tell who the faculty member is. The students are so engaged and people are sitting at tables and standing up and standing around whiteboards, and you walk by the glass fronts and you go, I'm not sure who the instructor is there. That to me is an exciting time when I walk past some of those schools. And where you see discovery and team-based activities, that's really the way people are learning stuff. Again, I go back to the flat tire. When you discover it yourself and you learn it yourself, you're going to retain that information. And so you will see strategies where if, the hardest thing to do when you're an instructor sometimes is when somebody asks a question is don't answer it. Is say, that's a good question. As I mentioned this morning, you sound like a consultant. You never answer a question. You say, that's a good question. What do you guys think over here? And you let people self-discover and answer some of the questions, and that really helps them retain the information just versus me just giving you the answer saying yes or no throughout that. What we look at, because we're a furniture company, is how can space be optimized to support the range of instructor and learner needs. We certainly think physical space plays a role in that, and what does that look like? And we think space matters, and that learning is strongly affected by educational climate and the places in which it occurs. If you work in a very creative environment, a very creative space, you're probably going to be very creative in that environment. If you're in a dark, dingy space, that's probably going to be reflected in the work that you're doing. It's just natural it happens that you are kind of a product of your environment within that space. We've seen classes and spaces where the furniture is bolted to the floor. Very difficult to get into a team activity and a group activity. So what you have is people huddling over and kind of sitting down like this and working in a group. Well, I'm a little older, but you're only going to do this for a little while before you're going to say that's not comfortable. And so, having that physical space support that movement and that connection is critical. And the use of space is changing too. One of the things that we like to say is, there are some people who learn alone but together. My son that I mentioned before, that's exactly the way he learned. He didn't really work with groups that much, but he needed to be surrounded by people. So when I called him and said, are you studying? He said yes, and I would ask him where he's at. If he said his apartment, I knew he wasn't studying. Because there's too much going on there, not educational related. But when he said he was at the library, I had a better chance that he was studying. Because he would do something like this, is he would sit with other people, even if he didn't know them, doing like activities or similar things. That got him in the mode of working. I was talking to Amy, I think, about mobile working today. I'm a mobile worker. Okay, I haven't had a desk for 10 years. Okay, so theoretically I could work at home. I don't have an office at home. So I have a dining room table that I can work at home. So I jokingly say when people call me and they get a hold of me, and if I'm at home, and they say, oh, sorry to interrupt your working, I'm kind of like, no, I really wasn't working, I was at home. Because I can't work at home. I know myself that I can't work at home. I have to go someplace else. Whether it's at a distributor's I'll go work at. My main place that I go to work at is, and fortunately because I call on higher ed, I go to the university libraries. They've allowed me to go into those libraries. So I can go to Northwestern, I can go work at that library. I get work done when I'm in those spaces. I go to my public library and get work done in there. And because I know myself that I have to do that. I like learning alone and doing stuff, but I need to be surrounded by people doing that. I sometimes go to the Starbucks, the Albans, but that doesn't necessarily get me in the learning mode because they're not learning necessarily. They're also communicating and goofing around a little bit too. So every space is a learning space, and you're going to see down on the second floor when you go through that space, that is a learning space. It's not a classroom, but it certainly is a continuation of what they're doing in the classes. And that's why that space is so exciting to the school here, and certainly to us when we see a space like that. So they all look different. There's no one right answer. I just have a couple slides that are blowing through of some different applications, and I didn't pull a ton of them on here, but you're going to see a variety of classrooms. Obviously, I got this going before. Yes, it is. You see Berkeley, but there you see an example where they've got a variety of stations where they can work along together. This one's an interesting product because you have it actually downstairs. It's a brand new product that we have. And this is based on research when we were looking at how students work. There were certainly cases where students want to have more privacy, but they also want to sit in lounge furniture. It's much more residential. You'll see students that put their feet up on top of everything. And I remember when I used to walk through, the joke would be, do you do that at home? The reality is, yes, they do it at home. So now they want to do it at where their office place is or where their workplace is. So based on some research that we did through the Midwest area here, we observed that students wanted to sit in a lounge piece, wanted the ability, though, to bring the work towards them in the electronics. The problem with most lounge pieces is once you bring your Apple computer, your smartphone, whatever your technology you're using, it was never made to support that activity. So I'd encourage you when you go on the second floor, I'm giving a little shout out to this product, take a seat in it. You will be amazed by not only how comfortable it is, but how it supports the way you work and the way you might learn. And then there's for those who want more privacy, because as much as we talk about collaboration and communication, that's not good for all work that we're doing. Some of us need a quiet space. It's great when I've got a door that I can close sometimes I need it, but not always do I have a door that I can close. So one of the things we're doing is trying to develop products that you can create a visual privacy. Frankly, the students have put headsets on. What's interesting, if you go up to those students that have headsets on, probably about half of them aren't listening to anything. That's just a visual cue to you to say, don't interrupt me. So in there you see two of them back to back where people can get close to each other but not necessarily be in each other's space. So there you see more of a collaborative group. You'll see some of this stuff down on the second floor. I'm sorry, some of my things are on the last slide. But you will see the ability where students can sit up. That's called the MediaState product, which will show up there, where you can connect your laptop, your smartphone, your iPad, whatever you have the device in front of you, and share your information and put it up on the screen. So imagine a group of 4 students that are on there. Everybody plugs in their devices there. When it's my turn to share, with the press of the button, my information goes up on there. It doesn't care whether I'm an Apple user or a PC user, whatever it is. And then if you've got 2 screens, you can compare and contrast one student work from the next. But it's that whole idea of co-creation of digital work, but it's how do I get my information from here up to here. So everybody can take a look at that and see what that looks like. So that one has some Texas chat. So there you see it more working and a single unit around the table there. That's at University of Michigan. So it's all meant for, and we'll see even some classrooms that'll engage a product like that in the back of the classroom. A lot of times some of these classrooms are much more zoned. So they'll have a palette of settings in there, as I talked about, lounge, desk, stool height in the back. But they'll also have different learning zones, almost like what we had in kindergarten. Where you had the reading station over here, where we all sat down on the carpet and read a story. We had the art table over here, and we had the, our storage elements over in this area. So one of the jokes is we're almost resetting the classrooms back to where we were in the kindergartens. One of these units is downstairs also. We're more of a lounge setting unit. Again, you'll see in the back more desking systems or individual work, but allows for that collaboration both digitally. I didn't talk a lot about analog on this presentation, but I didn't put it in this one. But in the active learning classroom itself, what we clearly are looking for, besides digital, which everybody focuses on the technology, is the writing side of it. Every wall that you have in my classroom of the future has writable surfaces. Either the paint is wall talker paint, or it's a Even better, it's an individual whiteboard that I can bring to my workstation, I can write here, and then I can bring it up and display it to the rest of the class or the rest of the group on there. That certainly helps with the interaction. So questions? You're going to see, as I said, down on the second floor when we walk through, it's not a classroom, but it incorporates really some of the active learning tenets that we have here about collaboration, about palette of place, so having different places to work at, palette of postures, so you're going to see some are lounge seating, some are desk seating, some are stool height seatings, to really support the students and faculty that are going to be using that space. Any questions? I think that's it. Yes?
How popular is the lounge seating?
It depends which kind it is. The Brody seating?
Yeah.
Extremely popular. We just started shipping that about a month ago, and we have orders all over the place. Both corporate and, because I would tell you we sell that on the corporate side as we do on the education side. It's, I happen to sit in it. That's generally where I work when I'm in our showroom, because I like sitting in the lounge position. But historically, lounge furniture doesn't support my back. That lounge furniture is really one of our, is almost like a chair that we have in there, that the ergonomic technology in that is as high as our highest performing chair. What I find out for me is I am basically, and partly because I'm a mobile worker, I'm a laptop user, a Surface user that I have, and a pad of paper. And that's what I work at. And I do 90% of my work that way. Everything's in the cloud. Somebody saw my laptop earlier with everything on my desktop. I pile everything on there. I keep everything on there. Yes, I do back it up. But I can work in that very easily. But I do get easily distracted by people. So when I want to focus, when I'm in the office, I'll work at that place. What's interesting is when I want to connect, because I'm on the road all the time and travel, I tend to work at more of a benching solutions where we're all together, and you'll see some of that, I guess, down on the second floor. The reason why I work there is because when I work there is because I'm gone all the time, it's a place for me to connect with my other coworkers. Frankly, I want to overhear the conversations that they're talking at home with their husband about children or what's happening there, because that kind of grounds me back into who I'm working with. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.